Welcome to Solved, the political discussion show for people with attention spans and those looking to develop one. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast Best of the Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems. Because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. Today, we are going hard on solutions and plan to solve Congress, both the House and the Senate, full representation for all, and homelessness while we're at it. Plus, for members, we have the definitively correct opinion about Cracker Barrel's new logo that they already got rid of because they're cucks who submitted to the mob. Or is it that, sorry, I think they were cucks who submitted to the mob when they made the new logo, but then they stopped being cucks who submit to mobs when the anti-woke mob called for a boycott, and then they submitted to that mob, but in a very uncuck-like way.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's really tough to keep together.
I know. It's hard to keep track of, I recognize, but all will be explained, but only for members. So today, we're sort of dancing around all of the fascism that's happening. And so we've got gerrymandering to talk about. We've got the takeover of DC to talk about. And so I thought, let's do some historical context. We like to do context here. And so I thought I'd go back to the very beginning of gerrymandering, or what people think is the beginning of gerrymandering. And I don't know if this is a widespread talking point, but Amanda and I heard like a caller on a radio show try to make the argument that Democrats had been the ones who started gerrymandering. Therefore, it's like fair game for Republicans to do it now and for forever. And so first, the history and then the present from this article, Elbridge, Gerry, and the Original Gerrymander. And for the purposes of this conversation, and maybe this conversation only, I'm actually going to pronounce his name correctly. So where gerrymandering came from. In 1812, Massachusetts Democratic Republicans drew up a plan for new voting districts to retain control of the state Senate in upcoming elections. Governor Gerry, the Democratic Republican, found the plan disagreeable, but reluctantly signed it. The plan was mocked by the Boston Gazette, which depicted an affected district in Gerry's home county of Essex as a salamander, calling it the Gerrymander. So, interesting enough, like I just bring this up because the guy for which it is named and mispronounced didn't even like it. He wasn't the one who came up with it. He didn't like it. He didn't want to do it. He signed it reluctantly, and he got stuck with it for all time. So I think that might be actually indicative of how fucked up the practice is. Let's put it that way, because immediately we're skipping ahead to this New Yorker article talking about the book Ratf, the influence of redistricting. And so the book actually makes the point that rat fucking via redistricting actually started much earlier. So the official gerrymander wasn't until 1812, but way back in 1788, we have this story. It says, quote, "The Constitution had left it to state lawmakers to determine how elections should be held, and in Virginia, the anti-federalist controlled the legislature. Knowing that his enemy Madison was planning a run for the House of Representatives, Patrick Henry set to work. First, he and his Confederates resolved that Virginia's congressmen would be elected from districts. Several other states had chosen to elect their representatives on a statewide basis, a practice that persisted until Congress intervened in 1842, much later. Next, they stipulated that each representative from Virginia would have to run from the district where he resided. If this is starting to sound familiar, this is the system we have today." And it goes on, "Finally, they stuck in the shiv. They drew the 5th district around Madison's home in the town of Orange to include as many anti-federalists as possible," end quote. So the whole idea of drawing districts in this way was often to specifically fuck over political enemies. That was the whole idea. And there were other options on the table. You could do multi-member districts or statewide voting, and everyone was just elected at large. But these dudes in Virginia figured out, well, we could try really hard. They ended up failing, but they tried really hard to keep James Madison out of the House of Representatives by, it wasn't called that at the time, but by gerrymandering his district to try to get a bunch of his political enemies to be in his voting district. So, I mean, as if it wasn't absurd enough to argue that Democrats came up with the practice in the first place, blah, blah, blah. That's absurd on its face. But I just wanted to point out that it goes back much further than we generally think.
Actually, yeah, Jay and I, so I'm from Massachusetts, and we were up there one time and happened to come across, and this is years ago now, the marble marker in Marblehead, the town of Marblehead, where Gerry was from, and stood there and read about this guy and then thought, is this the guy?
Not to brag, but I did know. I saw his name.
Oh, sorry, you did know. Well, no,
I
I remember you saying, this is the guy. Yeah.
It's the dude.
I think this calls for a real reevaluation of the way we talk about the founding fathers. I think the mythology around them, the legends that we have, don't fit the people in a lot of ways. And we'll keep the worst out of it, obviously. The slave owning part, like that's a deal breaker for the way we talk about them. But just the idea that they created the best democracy that's ever existed. Meanwhile, we're living in a system that they created that is crumbling bit by bit because of the way that it was created, and attaching it to the legend of these men so that we haven't adjusted it when we have better information. It's time to let the legend go, let the myth go, and just do it better.
Yeah. I want to defend the founding fathers and say that I do think they created the best democracy that existed at the time.
In the 1700s.
Sure.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it was the only one. Like, that's worth noting. But for being the only democracy, it was also the best. Well, I can give it that much.
The problem, too, is that it was flexible, which is good in some ways, but it was too flexible in very important ways. So the second they figured out what the government looked like, it started changing. And so, that is good. In a lot of ways, it's allowed us to, at some points in history, make things more fair or more, representative. And at other turns, like with this situation with gerrymandering, it's screwing us over and over. It's a tool of those who do not want actually representative government. So,
You say flexible, I say corruptible.
Like, corruptible? Sure. But at times that has worked in our favor. At other times it has been, a complete detriment.
And I don't think they were just some guys with some ideas that at the time, maybe it was the best at the time. But I want the idea that they were unique, special, the best among us to go away so that we can be realistic about what it was.
Yeah.
And was it the worst thing that was ever created? No. Was it the best thing? No. And that's the part that I've always had a problem with in this country, is just constantly talking about how great it was. And when you're putting something on a pedestal like that, well, if it's the best that's ever created, why would you change it? Yeah. And I think that mythology has made it ever more difficult to actually make the changes that we should make, need to make, desperately have to make at some point in the near future.
That's why I like emphasizing that it was all an experiment. I mean, that's truly what it was.
Mm-hmm. And I also don't mean to pile on police in Amanda's language. I just want to mention, you said that gerrymandering has screwed us over. I just want to point out the technical term is rat fucking. So it has been rat fucking us.
Oh, I know. And I don't think Jay mentioned, but this article about the book Rat Fuck, that came out in 2015, 2016 timeframe. This is something that, if you've been paying attention to this tactic, we've had a lot of good research and exploration on the topic. So here we are now in 2025 with the final conclusion of that tactic.
Or maybe season finale.
Yeah, season finale, sure. That's nicer.
I feel like it's very American though, right? Because like we're talking 12 years after we had signed the Declaration of Independence. Like how many elections actually took place before we started engaging in these tactics? And like, oh, were we warned about a two-party system? Nah, we'll keep with it.
We're
It'll be
very,
fine.
very much warned about that two-party system. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, as promised, that was the history. Now, fast forwarding to the present, I'm still just hung up on the person who was like, but Democrats started it. I just want to point out that the For the People Act, spearheaded by Democrats, was passed by the democratically controlled House in both 2019 and 2021, but was blocked by Republicans in the Senate, and it would have banned partisan gerrymandering by requiring independent redistricting commissions. So there is no question. You don't even have to do an analysis of, oh, but who's been doing it recently or who does it worse. Just look at the party that is trying to stop it and the party that is preventing it from being stopped. It could not be more clear. Next up, so there was that historical note about single member districts or statewide at-large voting. And this is a solution that I have heard bandied about quite a bit. It sounds very hopeful and positive to me as someone who believes that democracy should be fair. I don't know if I'm in the majority in this country with that way of thinking, but to learn a little bit about single member districts and other ideas, we have this article from Fair Vote. And so it points out that for the first 66 years of the country, states had their choice. They could have single member districts or multi-member at-large districts. They could do whatever they want. The problem was the way they counted votes at the time. Multi-member districts would end up with one party taking all of the seats, which sounds absurd, and you're right. So there would be like 10 people running from each party, and then the parties would run their elections and they'd get the votes, and a party could get like 51% of the vote. But the way that worked is, you went through and you voted for each of the 10 candidates who you wanted to support. And so the parties would say, vote for this slate of candidates. And so one after the other, all 10 people in the winning party would win their individual elections, and they might only get 51% of the vote, but all of the people from a single party would get 51%. Therefore, the state would elect 100% of the people from that winning party. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. That's what they did. And obviously, people saw the problem with this, which is why Congress passed a law in 1842, like I said, about 66 years after the founding of the country, to require single member districts in order to bring the election results closer to the proportion of actual votes cast. So the principle was affirmed that what we are striving for is accuracy, legitimacy, and a result that actually mirrors the will of the people. This principle was reaffirmed in the wake of the Voting Rights Act. This is skipping ahead to the 1960s. And again, they wanted to ensure that Southern states didn't try to go back to a winner-take-all system of at-large voting in order to negate the votes of newly enfranchised Black people. So again, every time Congress takes action, they are trying to make election results be as fair and representative as possible, which is good. It's nice that they're trying to do that. I assume everyone is excited about the the fairness achieved by the system as we have it, individualized voting districts and all of that.
The fairest in the world.
Probably. Let's just assume. I'm not going to check that fact, but you're probably right. However, now this is from the article, quote, whether consciously drawn with such an intent or not, districts can consistently deny the desired representation of a permanent minority, such as Blacks in most congressional districts, whites in majority Black districts, or Republicans in predominantly Democratic districts, or vice versa, of course, end quote. So, the feeling. Everyone, people in DC don't have a representative, but everyone else in the country, you have one representative. And in an age of polarization, there's a high likelihood that if you disagree with your representative, they are not even going to listen to you. They're not going to bother taking your opinion into account because, yeah, you might be their constituent, but you're not going to vote for them in the primary election. You're not going to vote for them in the general election, and they're going to probably win anyway because the vast majority of seats are safe. So there is no value to them to listen to you. So almost all of us are effectively disenfranchised. And, even if your representative agrees with you, you might yell at them and say, take action. And they're like, no, I already agree with you. Thanks for lighting the fire under me. But, I'm already on it is what often happens, right? So the actual process of representation, the way a republic is supposed to work, I'm going to speak in the vernacular of people who don't believe we're even supposed to live in a democracy because we're a republic. I'm just going to clarify that a republic is a form of democracy. But the idea is that through the process of representation, the people's will is supposed to be felt. And if you can't even express your opinion and feel like your representative is taking your opinion into consideration at all, then that should be as much indication as we need that we need to take things in a different direction.
Represent Us did a great video. I mean, God, now it's been like 15 years or something, just showing very clearly and simply in a visual way the creeping lack of representation in Congress over the last 20, 25 years. And of course, it tips in a pretty big way with Citizens United, but it's a slow roll. And I think that's partly why we're here. If this had happened quickly and abruptly, we would have done something. But because it was creeping along, rolling along, and getting worse and worse, nobody felt like it was the biggest problem we had or the most important problem we had. And now where, you have to convince people to vote because they don't think it's even worth it. And like they have some valid arguments, but it's still incredibly important. In fact, the situation that we're in has made it more important than ever to make sure people come out and vote. But at the end of the day, even if you're voting for the people that you align with the most, let's not say you are embracing the Democratic Party platform fully or anything, but you vote for those people, the chances of you actually getting not only just what you want, but even that the person you're voting for is going to use any political capital to do things that you want. I mean, it's almost non-existent now. And, that's why we are here. And unfortunately, because we have refused, and I say we, but it is obviously primarily the Republicans who have refused to make any sort of changes because their whole game is about making sure they have the upper hand. And they are much more willing than the left to play that game that way. And one of the quotes from an earlier article we just talked about that really stuck out to me was Karl Rove, of course, saying this is talking about the GOP's effort to, just lean into gerrymandering and their plan called Red Map and going after Democrats at their weakest point and like this incredible detailed strategy to win by manipulation, really, more than anything else. And he said,
back in 2010.
Yeah, back in 2010. People call us a vast right-wing conspiracy, Karl Rove told potential donors to the project at an early fundraiser in Dallas. But we're really a half-assed right-wing conspiracy. Now it's time to get serious. Democrats don't talk like that, Like that's just that's not the vibe over here. So, oof.
I mean, we could take a minute and just be really pissed off that 2025, like, it has eroded to the point that now we're actually talking about gerrymandering, like, just now. Yeah, like, it pisses me off, but also, what are we going to do but move forward? Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Deon, has your young child figured out the method of playing you and your wife off against each other?
Oh,
Yeah.
like she's been talking for 6 years. Yeah, so 7 years she's been doing it.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure when that started.
Yeah.
But that's the metaphor that came to mind when I was like, how fucking great would it be to have multiple representatives? Like,
Yeah.
One doesn't want to give me what I want. I'm going to go tell. I'm going to tell the other one. And if I don't get something from them, I'm going to go to the other.
The other one said you would give it to me.
Yeah.
I was watching a town hall from not my representative, the next representative over, Mark Alfred.
That has made national news.
Yeah, and the people in his audience definitely were people that voted for him. And one guy in particular stood out, like an older farmer who said, "I'm pissed off. I don't want to call. I just email because I don't want to curse at you."
Mm-hmm.
But he had all this anger, righteous anger. He's absolutely correct. All his points were great. And he's saying it to a man who, okay, like what? He's just going to listen to it and just what's going to happen? Nothing. Because is that guy going to vote for a Democrat? Is there a Democrat, even a viable Democratic candidate in that election cycle? Probably the last cycle, probably not. I know that my representative didn't run unopposed, but he ran against a candidate that ran no ads anywhere ever. So not only is there not someone to play off of, there's not even someone to play off of in the election for a lot of people.
Because they're not investing in those elections at all.
Yeah. So, I laid out why we got rid of multi-member districts or statewide at-large voting to begin with, but that was a relic of literally the 17 and early 1800s. I didn't go far enough down the rabbit hole to figure out, like, had they literally not thought of the concept of proportional representation, was there sort of a technical limitation on how the votes were counted? Whatever the reality, we do not have those limitations now. It is absolutely possible to have multi-member districts or statewide proportional representation where you vote for either a slate of candidates or the party. It could be set up in various ways, and the seats are doled out based on the percentage of votes received. And so not only would you end up with an accurate representation of what people vote for, but it would actually open the door to third parties. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why there is such resistance within the party. But like, if what we are living through now does not break down some doors and create some brand new demands for real overhauls of the system, then I don't know what is going to. And the idea that some sort of minimum bar being reached of, 5% or 10%, and a candidate from a party could actually get a seat, a libertarian or green or whoever could actually make some headway, would be incredibly interesting. That would inject new energy into democracy at the very least. So the idea of multi-member districts, I'm excited about. There's no traction for it right now, but we're here to, solve the problems years ahead of when anyone else is ready to take it on. It is the system that I have heard things about that is better than all the other options, because all the other options maintain the single districts and try to mitigate everything that is inherently anti-democratic about having drawn districts. So it is so much easier to solve the problem of gerrymandering, the incredibly anti-democratic nature of gerrymandering, or the problem of we have to draw some districts so that minorities can vote for someone who represents them as everyone sort of hates that stuff. I mean, like, it's more the conservatives who are against trying to do anything for minorities because it feels like reverse racism to them. And the left, as has happened so much recently, gets stuck defending an antiquated system because it's better than dismantling that antiquated system and leaving nothing in its place. But having no districts or multi-member districts is a great way to allow for more diverse candidates to be elected without them being pigeonholed into, well, the black guy only got elected because he's from the black district that was drawn specifically for those people, as if that's the healthiest way to have a democracy, where like dividing people up in those ways, it made more sense decades ago than it does now. And I think it gives a lot of people the ick. And I tried to do some research of like, am I missing something? If we did proportional representation, would minorities be even more edged out somehow? And the answer was no, if anything, the opposite.
I mean, in terms of how people feel about it, I had just been reading yesterday this poll that came out, and it was a Reuters Ipsos poll. And, more than half of respondents said they, first of all, they fear that American democracy itself is in danger. Valid, it is. But the next level of that is 55% of respondents, including 71% of Democrats and 46% of Republicans, agreed that ongoing redistricting plans, such as those hatched by governors in Texas and California in a process known as gerrymandering, were bad for democracy. And the fact that so few Republicans are concerned about that tells me that the messaging from the right has been so intensely positive. And dominantly, it is that the left is doing this, so we have to. That has been the messaging to voters. Now, politicians know that this is a strategy. People like Karl Rove understand that this is how you get votes and seats when you don't actually deserve them. But I was kind of surprised to see that it was only 46% of Republicans. I thought it would be a little bit higher than that. But no, they have been sold this for decades, that this is the way and this is how we make sure we win. And so the ideas that organizations like Represent Us really espouse is like, let's have it be fair for everyone. Wouldn't that be better? That hasn't been gaining steam on the right. On the left, it has. The left has been talking about gerrymandering for a long time, but in a negative way, in a let's do state commissions, which they have and have had some success with. And of course, now have to break that progress that we made because we have to react to what Texas is doing and what other states will follow and do next. So people aren't happy with this, but it is a result of lies and a result of making people feel that the only way to get anything is to practically break the system we have.
As a person who is currently selling a house and living in a house that is being remodeled, when you start fixing the house, we'll use the house as a metaphor for the country, you find a lot of problems. And if you don't update things on a regular basis, the house I'm living in right now, very old, the problems are really deep and might take a lot of effort to solve. And I think this gerrymandering and rat fucking issue is just like pulling off your siding and finding a bunch of rods. There's
Right.
so many things that need to change. And Amanda, you brought up the point about the Karl Rove thing. There's another issue in here where you see that Republicans aren't as mad or don't have the same opinion, because a huge component of this is they also have this machine that feeds their voters propaganda all the time, constantly. They are told exactly what they want to hear, and not to get those people off the hook. They consume it freely. They choose to listen to this stuff. But in order to have a functioning democracy, we have to have shared information. We have to be deciding things on shared reality, shared facts. And we aren't. Not even a little bit. Like, I was thinking about, like, this show, what would be the counterpart on the right? And in my mind, I think there is no left counterpart to that, not functionally. Like, we, believe it or not, this show on YouTube with the cartoons is not being funded by billionaires. It's there is no outreach by billionaires to push this to a lot of people. And that's the case with just the left in general. Like, when you get closer to the center, like the Pod Save America shows, they have some reach. But as far as a vast communications machine, there is no left version of that. And because of that, we are no longer living in a shared reality, if to the extent that's even possible. But basic facts we don't agree on. So it's hard to have a democracy when we don't agree about, I don't know, up and down and left and right.
Well, and I want to echo what Amanda said and also add the psychology behind it, right? Like, we know team mentality is a real thing, like, let alone the propaganda machine, but just locking in the two-party system. So it kind of sucks that I think this representation, allowing third parties, is a fix for this. And yet, because we're stuck in this problem, it seems so distant that, we could actually come together and have that agreement of more democracy, not less. Because again, if my team's winning, why would I ever want to change the game? Like,
Right.
yeah.
I know. I hope no one really thinks along those lines, because the nature of American democracy over the last, well, I mean, kind of forever is, I mean, this is a bit of a deep cut, but it has been said that the metaphor of American democracy is the pendulum. It always swings. So anyone who thinks, well, I'm winning now, so don't change a thing, has no knowledge of history or foresight. Like, every swing has a backlash. Every newly elected president loses seats the next time people have a chance to express their anger and frustration. Like, that is how it goes.
And that's, I mean, I think that's just a reality. I don't think that's like an opinion. I think that's just history shows that happens over and over again. And the worse it swings in one direction, the further it swings in the other direction is a correction. And I think, the silver lining in all this is it has swung incredibly far to the conservative, fascist, whatever you want to call it side. And going back and overcorrecting that, we might get some real progress, real change out of it. I'm kind of thinking, the Great Depression,
Right.
New Deal kind of correction.
That's what we need.
Yeah. There are the arguments that the right makes that say we are losing, so we have to do dramatic, intense, like things that we would consider bad to fight back, right? That has been the message for quite a long time. And so maybe now they feel they're winning, but they always love to feel like they're on the back foot. That's sort of their whole ethos, so that they can constantly feel oppressed and, that they're being put upon in some way. But the argument that's being made for why we should totally change how we do the census is connected to all of this, because I guess Elon Musk tweeted this a while ago, but this has just been in the ether on the right. The public argument, quote unquote, from the right for why they want to redo the census without including undocumented people is, they claim, because Democrats are inflating population numbers by including them, which then is swaying congressional apportionment. And that gives them, more seats overall. Now, of course, the reality of that is that, yeah, California has the most undocumented immigrants, but Texas has the next most. And then New York, and then Florida, and now Georgia and North Carolina are, increasing on that list. And I read some articles leading up to this about, like, if you break it down by state, nobody is winning more seats. Like, it's all evening out, because that's just how the math works. Of course, we don't do math. So, I mean, like, the reality is that it's actually not giving anyone any upper hand. And unfortunately, no one cares about what the reality is. As Deon's saying, we don't have standard facts or a standard bed of reality to build upon, or then discuss solutions or, ways to move forward. And so this is a deeply entrenched problem, and a problem with which it benefits the right to continue to tell the story that the left is playing the game in a more evil way. And so everything we do, and this isn't just about this issue, obviously, this is across the board, anything that they're fighting for, they say, this is justified. It doesn't matter how bad it is, or how much it breaks the system, or how much it hurts some people. It is all justified because we are under attack. The other side is playing unfairly, and so we must respond in kind, when that is not the reality. And so we're playing this game where everything is one-sided, and the other side feels that we are the ones always trying to break things first, or trying to harm people first. And that is a mirage. That is a fabrication that has been created and crafted by expert messaging people on the right for decades. It's no surprise we are here right now.
So I think we've all agreed that we're in favor of doing away with gerrymandering entirely, and maybe the best case scenario is to get rid of congressional districts entirely. But considering that we live in the world that we do, if we can't pass that type of reform on the national level, The question then becomes, how should Democratic states respond right now? And Slate put forward what I thought was an interesting argument that I then eventually saw the fatal flaw in the more I read. So this article is how Democrats should actually respond to Republicans' attempts to rig voting maps. And the article starts by comparing the gerrymandering wars we are currently witnessing to the Cold War, which I thought was a good start. And they describe the methods of nuclear deterrence and the systems of automation that helped guarantee mutual destruction if a first strike were launched during the Cold War. And so then this is how they pitch it for the gerrymandering dynamics we're watching play out. It says, quote, "There is a way out of this death spiral. It involves a simple concept, automation. By enacting a law that would automatically gerrymander California's maps if and only if Republican-controlled legislatures do so first, California officials can make clear that the choice is entirely in the hands of Republican state legislators. In other words, just as automated nuclear retaliation systems helped prevent a horrific strike during the Cold War, a similar approach can stop the gerrymandering race to the bottom before it's too late." And that struck me as good and interesting. They argue that blue states should keep their independent redistricting commissions, but then add on to it saying, quote, "Then the new system would add a critical novel factor. The commission must draw congressional districts to ensure national partisan balance, so the percentage of Republican and Democratic seats in Congress closely corresponds to the number of votes for Republicans and Democrats nationwide," end quote. And they're proposing this as what California should do now. I think this was written just a few days before Texas officially did their new district lines. And they were like, California should rewrite this law and have that be a deterrent for Texas, because then Texas would think to themselves, well, okay, so if we don't gerrymander further, then we can be pretty well assured that California won't either. However, the problem with this is that mostly in red states, but not entirely, they have already thrown things so far out of whack that if blue states were to enact an automatic rebalancing plan that would only kick in if red states gerrymandered so that the proportions of votes to elected representatives was out of whack, then the system would automatically kick in immediately because we already live in a system where things are completely out of whack. What came to top of mind is North Carolina. They elect a Democratic governor, but their congressional seats are so gerrymandered that out of 14 congressional representatives, 10 of them are Republicans. So the same group of people who elected a Democrat as governor sent 10 out of 14 Republicans to Congress. So we are not starting from neutral, where California could say, like, well, if things start to get out of whack, then we will take action. Things are already completely rat fucked.
Yeah. And going back to what happened in 2012, Obama carried Pennsylvania by 300,000 votes, and the state's Democratic congressional candidates collectively outpolled their GOP rivals by nearly 100,000 votes. Republicans still won 13 of Pennsylvania's 18 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. Doesn't sound right.
And then going back to the media component of that, that's like a mainstream media at this point, like trope is the both sides do it kind of thing. This article presupposes that it is equal, that both sides are playing the same game, and it's not true. It never has been true. I wish the Democrats were half as radical as the mainstream
Right.
media says that they are.
Says they
I
are, yeah.
wish they were a left-wing party. There's not even a left-wing party. Like, they are the party that left-wingers vote for because it's the more left-wing option. And again, you know, the caveats that socially, absolutely, they are more left-wing. But as far as like a lefty party, there isn't one in America. So it's already not completely balanced. They don't do the same things that Republicans do. They don't play the same game. The whole issue with California is that they have to go back and vote to undo the independent commission that does the
Mhm.
districts anyway, because they set that up on their own to make it more fair. A thing that Texas was never going to do at any point, no matter what California did.
Yeah.
I think in America, we always are going to have the weird dynamic of federal government versus state. And this is one of the things I don't know what the perfect balance is. I like that we have representatives. I like that it seems like in a perfect, actually democratic world that you could have someone closer to home that you could actually talk to and advocate for. I like the thought of that.
Yeah.
But it is so messy that all of the states can do different things. And yeah, of course, it creates systems of corruption. This is not the most democratic way that we could go about it. But this is called solved, not continue to complain. So
That's okay. We can complain. There's so much to complain about.
yeah. So I mean, in full transparency, I probably do lean more towards federal than, states, but I don't think I can get behind every state just deciding what they want to do because it can fluctuate so drastically between leaderships.
Yeah. And of course,
Yeah.
the other side of that is, now Trump wants to control
Yeah.
our elections from the federal level. So it's
What's the balance?
really
Yeah.
hard to find what that balance is without allowing, and this is, of course, although we don't want to mythologize the founders, like they had a tough problem to
Yeah.
to work
Of course.
with,
Yeah. I mean, administering elections on the state level shouldn't be a problem, and having centers of power be broken up is good. There's huge value in that. But creating baselines by which we all work together. I mean, going back to why we have districts in the first place, Congress passed a law insisting that we have districts in every state so that some states wouldn't have winner take all, while other states had more fairly apportioned representatives. And so when we don't have a federal baseline, that's what creates races to the bottom. So when we have a system that allows gerrymandering and we don't have a federal law that bans it, then people who don't want to gerrymander will find themselves doing it because other states will. And if you're playing a game and your opponents are cheating, you get no bonus points for not cheating. And so there's a race to the bottom. And we're just seeing that play out in an accelerated way right now. But that has been the dynamic for kind of forever. And so the only way out of that death spiral, like this article from Slate tries to suggest a sort of, nuclear automation mitigation detente kind of thing, but we're already too deep in it. Actually need regulation that just bans it entirely. And if we can ban legislative districts while we're at it, all the better.
Yeah. And the amount of funding that goes into playing these games. I mean, this is an article from 2016, but it says that Democrats had to respond to the red map plan, which is what the Republicans were calling their strategy to gerrymander and use manipulative tactics. And so the Democrats came up with their own called Advantage 2020, and they funded it with $75 million. How much did the Republicans fund red map? $125 million. So it's just a game of money no matter what. That's what it comes down to.
All right, now to fix the Senate and Washington, D.C. at the same time. This article from the American Prospect, How Moderate Senate Democrats Enabled Trump's D.C. Takeover. I guess we're going to solve that too. The D.C. takeover, representation, and structural inequality of the Senate, one fell swoop. So this article says, quote, D.C. should become a state. The arguments are obvious. As the district's license plates sarcastically point out, taxation without representation, they note. There are about 700,000 American citizens living there who have no representation in Congress. That is an outrageous violation of the principles that underlay the founding of this country. American citizens should have representation in their own government. And the same is true of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And it goes on to say that, quote, D.C. statehood would also reduce the partisan bias of the Senate, On its face, the Senate is a ludicrously unfair institution that grants unjustifiable overrepresentation to randomly depopulated states. Wyoming residents count about 70 times as much as Californians. I know, like
So insane.
every time I read about, comparing Wyoming to,
God.
and just to point out, Wyoming has the same number of people as Washington, D.C.
DC.
So it's not that D.C. is so small that it shouldn't be a state. Well, it's so small. No, it has the same number of people as a fully fledged state. And then the article goes on to remind us that all Republicans, in addition to two moderate Democrats, Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, were responsible for the For the People Act failing in the Senate. That act wasn't going to create DC statehood, but it was sort of making moves toward it. And then Democrats also passed a separate DC statehood bill in 2020, which Republicans never considered in the Senate.
Yeah.
That's shocking. Can't believe that. Yeah, I mean, watching this unfold is just like terrible for so many reasons. But one of them I think of is, the amount of governors and stuff that have stepped up against Trump
Mhm.
and the limited power that DC has to stand up to the president. I mean, this is such an unfair fight. If I ever saw one, like, again, so many reasons to be outraged, but I absolutely support statehood. If you weren't on board and you're watching all of this, should definitely now get on board.
And, Jay and I used to be some of the disenfranchised voters in Washington, D.C. for, I lived there for 14 years. Jay lived there for at least most of that. The longer you live there, the more enraging it becomes that you don't have a voting member of Congress. We have Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's great, although she is getting up there in age and probably won't be in that seat for much longer. But she does not have power. She can go and talk to other members of Congress and try to, convince them to vote for something that is what her district would want, but she can't actually vote. And I remember when I was on the Hill for a rare disease lobby day and everybody was going to see their voting members of Congress, and I went to see Eleanor Holmes Norton's office and had a nice chat, but they were like, yeah, well, unfortunately, Eleanor can't, take any floor votes or do anything here, but, she'll definitely keep your requests in mind. And it's agonizing. Like, it's enraging. And DC is such a strange place because it is the epicenter of so many things. It is an incredibly diverse, interesting and cool place where people don't just come just because of the government. That is a city of real people who grew up there. And I think people who don't know that kind of assume it's just a place where everyone comes. And yes, it's a transient city, but there are a lot of people who grew up there, live there. That is home. That is not just, a government epicenter. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the problem is that on the right, they value land more than people. And that's why Wyoming is, of course we get all that representation. We own all that land. Well, I mean, that's a racist hangover from a time where only landowners could vote, right? Like, that's the bullshit of our past. And what actually matters in government is people who are alive. And the fact that we can't even really get on the same page about that has always struck me. And they can share their little maps, their color-coded maps online as much as they want that make it seem like the whole country is red. Well, when you look at the maps that show people and how people vote, that is not the case.
That's the point I wanted to make so badly in this whole discussion, because I do think this is a great opportunity to message that exact point. People matter more than land, because that's a real thing on the right, that they always break out those maps and say, well, look how red it is. And like, well, there's 7 people where you showed this red.
Right.
Who cares?
Right.
And this would be a great opportunity to put people first. That is the whole point of this DC statehood, is people. And it would come up because there is going to be the argument against the geography, the size of the place. How could it be a state? It's too small. And we have to get over that. And that would be the perfect way to do it.
Sure.
Just compare the amount of people here versus the amount of people here, and do that over and over again. And if some billionaires could get behind us on the left so that we could push this message and say
Is
that
that what
over
we
and over again.
want? I
Yes.
don't know. We went off
No,
the rails
no.
there.
No.
Some
I'm
benevolent.
that's what I thought this was for. Like we're
We're
trying to get billionaires more involved in. Oh no.
yeah, we're courting the
the worst.
billionaires that we're doing.
That's the worst. But it is a great opportunity to message
Yes.
people over land.
Absolutely.
I've just had a 20-year-old story of mine reframed for me.
Hmm.
I got interested in politics in 2001 as a pizza delivery driver, listening to my car radio. Like I started out listening to music and I got bored of the music because I was in the car so much. And so I turned on AM radio and it was like, let's see what people are talking about. And I heard some of the absolutely wackiest things from conservative talk radio.
Yeah.
And the first one on the list was a guy defending George W. Bush's election because he lost the popular vote. And he was making the argument. He's like, I mean, sure, if you do the popular vote, that it's true that he lost. But if you look at the vote by square mileage of the country, then you can see how much he won by. And I've always just taken that as on its face absurd, but I hadn't considered, I mean, because particularly at that time, I was just having my introduction to politics. I mean, I had like a little bit of background in understanding. I wasn't a total babe in the woods, but I was coming to these talking points completely fresh and knew that that was stupid, but didn't even consider that what might be behind that was the idea that land matters more than people.
Mhm.
I thought he was just like grasping at straws to try to justify the unjustifiable. And I think that's also true. But some of the straws they grasp for that seem on their face absurd, I mean, they are, but also it taps into something that works for conservatives that would never work on
Yeah.
the left. Like we could never make the inverse argument that, well, but land does matter more than people. So that's why we can argue our point and why we are correct about X.
Mhm.
It would never fly. But with conservatives, it does.
Well,
They
it's
can
like-
actually ingest that argument and be like, well, I mean, that is a lot of land and land matters a lot because, you know, like,
because
you
of
know, the whole
colonial settler mindset. Yeah.
yeah, the whole government is set up to, you know, manage land and property for the sake of the ownership class. So I guess the land deserves votes more than people do.
I feel like you also have the voters who have the mindset that land should matter, would also extend it to like populations in the city just because there's more people there. Like they should not get more of a say
Mhm.
in like, or like a bigger say, if you will,
Yeah.
on what happens to my land. Like,
Rural urban
Um,
divide. Yeah.
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 And could never consider the fact that if everyone just voted, like things are going to be better for all people, not just some. We don't have to pick and choose.
Mhm.
But it's either the city gets the benefits or I get the benefits as a farmer with land or
Right.
whoever we want to pretend owns this land besides corporations.
Yeah, like, but money in politics helps drive that. And they're not completely wrong, right? Because, yeah, the politicians who are elected will say, well, where are my donors at? Are they out in the rural areas or in the cities? And that's something that, you know, is getting worse. And again, the left has been arguing to get money out of politics forever. The right is like, no, 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 we have to keep it because that's how we keep winning, even then when we're not supposed to. So,
This land mattering more, like we can broaden that to property. This is just a legacy of slavery because that's what the Three-Fifths Compromise was. The Three-Fifths Compromise was not about 3/5 of a person having to be counted. It was 3/5 of property
Yep.
having to count in the census for them to have more voting power, because that has always been the same mindset. It is one long unbroken line from that group
Yep.
to this group. That mentality of property matters more than people.
Yeah.
And back then, they had people as property.
mhm.
Property is speech.
Yeah.
So make DC a state and it'll fix everything we just talked about, in addition to creating a giant hurdle that Trump would have had to go around when trying to militarize the city and, that is absolutely acting as a gateway drug. Like, he's going to use the fact that he sent the National Guard to DC as an excuse for, like, well, if I can do it in one place, then of course I should do it in another. And that is 100% the game they're playing. And so that sort of chink in the armor of DC not being a state allowed him to federalize, militarize DC in a obviously fascist takeover, which will be used as an argument to continue that pattern. So this article was saying, blame Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema
Yeah.
for Trump's takeover of DC. Arguably, fair enough. Also, every single Republican who doesn't think people in DC deserve representation, fuck them.
Yeah. And I mean, the call to action is call your members of Congress to advocate for the people of DC because they don't have any power. Just fucking nuts.
And finally, as promised, we're going to solve homelessness because Trump is claiming the right to militarize cities largely on the false claims about crime, but also the genuine problem of homelessness. And it's been pretty clear for a while that the homeless would be next on the target list. It's hard to know. I don't know if they actually lay out the list of their target enemies in Project 2025. But the obviously like punitive conservative strategy for dealing with homelessness has never worked and is far more expensive than strategies that do work. There's literally no good reason to follow their strategies unless you enjoy being cruel. So Mother Jones it was a podcast conversation. So we read the transcript of the podcast titled Trump's Homelessness Crackdown Has Been Tried Before. It Didn't Work. And it's an interview with Sam Simbaris, creator of the Housing First program for helping homeless people with mental health issues. And he says, lots and lots of incredibly interesting and insightful things. So the whole conversation is worth a listen. But basically, how we got here, he starts out, quote, a whole generation has grown up thinking homelessness is part of the landscape. But homelessness really started in the early 80s after the Reagan administration took office and introduced policies that were supply-side economics. They essentially cut out the public housing program, which was housing for people who needed a rent subsidy. Right after that, we began to see people on the streets of every major city in America. That was homelessness. That was a disaster, end quote. And so the system that has remained more or less in place insisted that people needed to fix their mental health or addiction problems before they would qualify for housing. So as if fixing those things weren't hard enough, now people were expected to do it while living on the street. Good luck to you. It's incredibly unsurprising that the problem has persisted decade after decade. And so we end up with this cycle. The punitive cycle that conservatives put in place is we arrest people and send them either to jail or a hospital for a short time, which is incredibly expensive. And then they get released way before they're fully recovered because recovery is a very long-term process. And so they end up back on the street and do it all over again, obviously. And so Sam explains that he absolutely shares the frustration about homelessness in our cities, but points out the absurdity of the expensive and cruel tactic that Trump and conservatives use instead of the stuff that works. So he just explains it this way, and some people don't care that much about people, but they do care about money. So how about you just focus on the money for a second? It says, quote, it costs on the low side about $1,500 to $2,000 a day for a hospital bed. If you put someone in a hospital for a month, you have basically spent, let's say $2,000 a day, you've spent $60,000 a month of hospitalization. And then at the end of that month, the person is discharged back into homelessness. For $60,000, you could pay someone's rent for 3 or 4 years, depending on where they're living. This is not saving anyone any money.
Yep.
It's weird operating in the nonprofit space because I feel like the only people who are confused on how to solve a lot of these issues are representatives
Yeah.
or maybe generally disconnected citizens. But there's not huge contention in the spaces. People know what works. There's also the no wrong door, which is if you go to get any services, we will refer you to any other needs that you need to be met. Like it is a collaboration among nonprofits or public services that you can literally obtain housing, mental health, other things that you might need by going into one door. And then we still have commissions to study stuff. We still have discussions around I don't know what's going on with this. And I do think there are arguments that will reach the general public because it is something that all of us are impacted by, especially now after the pandemic, the rates that you've seen, the unhoused population. It's hard not to notice. It's hard not to be impacted in some way.
Yeah.
So this one, I think you have to distort and twist your own logic so much to make the argument against giving homeless people homes as your starting point, because it's in the name. Their problem is that they don't have a home. The solution is that they would have a home. And everything else goes from there. And they have completely reversed it. And I think at the end of this, I think you got to the point that there's a value problem here in the country that I think a lot of this goes back to, this is a puritanical thing. Like you are being punished by God because you don't have a home. You are not worthy of it. So that we need to punish you. It's not about solving the problem. I don't think they really ever have wanted to solve the problem. I think they want to.
Hold on. That would be the conservative counter to this show. Our show is called Solved, and their show would be called Punished.
Absolutely. That's it. That's it. I think we solved what they are. Because they don't.
We're laughing because it's so true.
Sorry, punished exclamation point is what I always like.
I think they'd have 2 or 3 exclamation points. But that's it, right? They don't want to solve the problem. They want someone to suffer. And there has to be some addressing of this feeling, this vibe that they have, that this masochism that they want to harm people. Because if we can't get past that, like it's always going to keep creeping up. And I don't know what the solution to that is, obviously. So I brought up something unsolved that we can't solve. But it is something that needs to be addressed because they like having homeless people. They like it as a carrot. They're the stick. If you don't go to your job, this is what could happen to you.
This is what could happen to you.
If you don't listen to your, undemocratic workplace and follow all the undemocratic rules, you could end up on the street. And we're not going to give you a home as a solution to this. We're going to forcibly put you in a, old school One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest psych ward and then put you back out on the streets. And we'll just keep doing that because homelessness is a tool for the capitalist system as it exists.
Yeah. Although speaking of asylums like that, in the 80s, we closed down hospitals, and that is what created partially, again,
Thank you,
as we
Reagan.
talked about, Reagan, et cetera. Like there are lots of other economic things, but that was a huge reason. Now, granted, a lot of those places were terrible and awful and not helping anybody, but there was no, okay, we're shutting these down and now we have another place. It just ended. And so people were completely stranded and left with nothing. And this actually happened in the UK as well. We were talking to friends recently over there who worked on that project in the UK, but they had more plans in place and cities were trying to fund something else as a result. Granted, that part wasn't Thatcher's idea. That was, something further down. But like that's unimaginable cruelty. Like it's unimaginable to me to put an unbelievably vulnerable person just left, just open the door and that's it. You're on your own. I mean, that is cruel and sick. And of course, they're worried about quote unquote crime and all these things. And like, if you create desperate people, that is what you're going to get. That is literally how it works. And again, these are things that we've known and it seems they refuse to believe no matter what. And it's all about your bootstraps and, getting yourself in a good position, even with nothing to help you at all. And that's some sign of success. And society doesn't have to be like that. And so it is. It's about cruelty. It's about punishment. And honestly, I just have to say that Gavin Newsom is having a tough time responding to this issue because California just went on their homelessness rage this summer, forcing communities to quote unquote clean up homeless encampments. Did they provide a solution or anywhere for people to go? No. So, really hard to make the moral argument when you, as a Democratic governor, are doing the same thing. It's just on actually a larger scale than just DC.
Well, and I think they successfully made homeless synonymous with unemployed. And like the reality is a
Yeah.
lot of states do their individual data. So I, looked up some stats from 2022, various states. Like I'm going to give the range, which is 40 to 60% of unhoused people are employed at some capacity. And like that number to me was a little bit higher than I was expecting. But I do again think it's the stigma because it's hard for us, even though we know it's a possibility, it is hard for us to imagine that someone can work a job and be unhoused.
Mhm.
I feel like that was a capitalist argument, and I need to clarify that you do not have to work to deserve housing.
Yeah.
That is a basic human right. But if we're going off of that, we still have a significant portion of people who don't have housing and are actively working. And we
Mhm.
also know that those go hand in hand. When you lose housing, it is likely that you will also lose your employment.
I, took a sociology class in college while I was living in DC, which really was eye-opening, and I visited shelters and I learned a ton about what was driving the homelessness crisis back then, and that was in the early 2000s. I was reading in the last few weeks about how the cost of housing is the top reason why people are unhoused. It is too expensive. So even people who are working cannot make rent. And that is obscene. That's obscene.
Again, like as someone who is currently selling a house, we bought our house 7 years ago. It is on the market right now for 50% more than we bought it for 7 years ago. And
Yep.
it's at market value. We're not putting it on the market trying to get a huge profit. We're
Mhm.
putting it on the market at market value. The market has gone up for homes 50% in Southwest Missouri, which is one of the
Mhm.
cheaper places to live in America. If you don't live in one of the cheaper places in America, it's even worse. And that affects rent, that affects everything. At some point, there has to be a push for some nominally left party to say that housing is a human right, because we do a huge part of this. We have to put people in homes. People have to be able to be in homes. Like you can put someone in a home, but if they can't afford to stay there, you keep the cycle going. So at some point, there has to be some price controls. And Zoran Mondani is the villain right now in the right wing media because he represents someone who does have a plan, who does have ideas about affordable housing. And that is a huge financialization center for people, turning housing into a commodity. And at some point, for this to really be fixed long term, it has to be decoupled from commodity. It's not a commodity, it's a right. You have to have a roof over your head, you have to have water, you have to have food. These are things that human beings need to live. And we have to have a society that's for people and not land and not property and not structures.
Yeah. I mean, we live in a house flipping culture.
Yeah.
That's not great.
Gross.
Yeah. For more details on all of that, check out our past conversations on Solved, as well as our other show, Best of the Left, wherever you get your podcasts, about the horrible nature of living in a sort of landlord's utopia. That was an episode of Solved we did recently, and we have absolutely had multiple conversations and episodes about socialized housing, including examples of places around the world where it has actually worked. So, just to like put a pin on how we ended up where we are with the homelessness policy, the guy Sam being interviewed who did the Housing First program, he was asked, so this actually used to be a bipartisan thing. Like George W. Bush was in favor of this. Like we were interested in doing these programs. It
Mhm.
never got scaled up, but everywhere it's tried, it works well. And so we are right now at the point where obviously we should be scaling it up. And what he says is it was the first Trump administration. They appointed someone who was anti housing first, and they said housing fourth. First is treatment, sobriety, and then employment, and then housing, maybe. But I know, right? But they weren't in power long enough to actually do anything about it. And then Project 2025 did a lot of work between those two terms. And when they hit the ground running this time, it wasn't housing fourth, it was housing last. And now we have the executive order that says actually don't do housing first at all.
Yep.
So we have this program. It helps 80 to 90% of the homeless people it works with. To be clear, it's mostly a program that focuses on those with addiction and mental health problems. So the vast majority of homeless people don't actually need housing first. They just need housing vouchers. And none of this has been scaled up on the national level to the point that it would solve the problem we have at the scale that we have it. That's the only issue. I mean, well, there's the structural issues of wages being too low and prices of housing being too high. But given the scenario we have, if we wanted to solve housing, we could do it if we just put enough money into it. And instead, we're going to put all that money into punitive, cruel policies that punishes people because, either they really enjoy punishing people, sort of get off on it, or they just ideologically believe without evidence that that's a better way to approach it. So those are basically your two options.
I wanted to also call out Miriam's Kitchen in DC. If anyone's looking for a place to support right now, I have personal experience with them. They are a wonderful organization. They provide like everything basically. And they are, doing their best right now because as these encampments get completely not cleaned up, bulldozed, people are re-traumatized in a severe way. These are people who have already been through hell and back. And now the very few things they have in this world, the very little things that make them feel even remotely safe in their unsafe situation, have been destroyed and taken away. So even people who may have been on the mend are going to probably have to start from zero again. This is the kind of trauma we're causing these people. These are people's family members. They have families, many of them, often. I get that there is a apathy on the right, but my God, like this is really sick. This is really, really sick. And anything any of us can do to support the organizations that are doing the work that we should be doing at a federal level, please do. And, we'll all make that commitment here too.
So did we solve it today?
I was about to say, I think we solved it.
I said we were going hard. We got no more congressional districts and proportional representation.
Mm-hmm.
We got DC statehood for full representation and to help balance the Senate, and housing first programs to keep people off the streets and ensure that mental health and addiction is treated in a way that's both cost effective and just regularly effective.
Yeah. I mean,
it's done.
I was like, are we submitting this legislation?
Yeah,
like, what's our role here?
let's send a letter.
Send a letter. I like it.
Oh, God.
Well, I don't know what you could possibly add, but if you have a comment you'd like to send in, you can send us a voicemail or text message at 202-999-3991. Send an email to j@bestoftheleft.com or reach us on Signal at bestoftheleft.01. Thanks for listening, and remember that this is all really happening, so continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.